Today's video is sponsored by Stolen Thunder Accounting.
I'm Victoria English, and welcome to another episode of the Exit Interview. Today we're going to be speaking with Dan Scholes, who is the president and founder of Optimus Business Advisory. How are you doing today, Dan?
Wonderful. I'm doing great. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So I see that you've personally scaled and sold your own business, and then you've spent over 15 years helping other owners exit. So how did your experience as being a business owner help you to help other owners?
Sure. So, look, maybe what we can do is I'll start with a bit of a brief backstory that sort of leads into today. So I started my career just over 25 years ago as a corporate attorney at one of those large global law firms and spending a lot of my time involved in buying and selling businesses. I didn't love practicing law, and so a few years in, I transitioned into running and scaling my own businesses and have nearly 22, 23 years of hands-on experience as an owner and as an operator. But the one thing that practicing law did for me is it really gave me a master class in selling businesses. So I had an opportunity to work with a whole bunch of buyers, a whole bunch of sellers, really, be right involved in the actual process. And so that led into, after I started in business in about 2010 or so, the business grew quite explosively. And I knew that my legal background gave me a bit of an edge. And so I began helping. I was asked and I began helping a number of business owners who knew they wanted to sell their business, but they didn't know where to start. And so after doing that for a few years, the real epiphany for me came after I successfully sold my primary business in 2019 to a PE-backed firm. And I saw for myself firsthand how being prepared gave me a real upper hand and also an excellent sale multiple. And so I realized that most business owners weren't equipped with the same type of advantage. And the result was they end up leaving tons of money on the table. And worse yet, often end up in situations quite poor with buyers after they sell. And this was something that was crystallized for me a number of years ago. I had a conversation with a buyer, or a seller rather, that I met, an owner of a business who had told me that he happily sold his business. And when I asked him about his price, his terms, I realized he'd been taken. And so for me, it's a mission to help level the playing field for sellers, especially given the level of sophistication out there of strategic buyers and private equity firms. I know what goes into building a business, years that you put in, the time, the effort, the money, and the sacrifices. And business owner, you deserve to maximize your exit. So bottom line, what I do now is I help agency and service-based business owners maximize their value. And what we're really talking about is upwards of 30 to 50% increases in the value of their business through preparation. So as an example, just last year, I helped a client of mine who thought his business was worth a few $100,000. 6 months later, he got 6 offers, all of which were over $2 million. That's an example of sort of the transformation that I try to help my clients through. And what I've learned is, and I learned this for myself and also for my clients, the difference between okay exit and really a life-changing exit isn't luck. It's preparation, and the preparation needs to start before you're ready to sell. So for me, I wear 4 hats: an attorney, business owner, just like my clients, a seller, so I've been through the process, and also with lots of experience as an exit and transaction advisor. So you get someone who's been in your shoes and knows how to win from every angle. But I think what I tell people, though, and my wife asks me this all the time: why are you still doing this? You sold, you can be retired. And I think I live for phone call I get when my clients sell their business and they tell me that they never believed that their business was saleable, never believed that they could sell for what they sold for. And honestly, I get more satisfaction from that than I ever got from selling my own business.
That's really exciting. So are you still a practicing attorney then?
I have my papers, but I haven't formally practiced in 25 years, 24 years.
Okay.
But I don't formally practice, so I don't say that I practice, but everything that I learned comes into play when it comes to helping business owners.
So you advocate that every business owner should build their business to sell. And what's the biggest misconception owners cling to when they think they're ready, when the time comes to sell?
I think there are two misconceptions, and they're both related. So one's really a corollary of the other. So I think the biggest misconception that people have is that if you have a great business, will automatically lead to a great exit. And I tell my clients all the time that business that works really well for you, that's making you a lot of money, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to find a buyer that wants it. So, and I think part of the reason is buyers don't buy past performance; they buy future confidence. And so John Warlow, who wrote Built to Sell, one of my favorite books, I think he described it this way: when you're a seller, you're at the finish line. Buyers are at the starting line, and they want to know what's going to happen with the business down the road. And so what looks like a strong business on the surface can fall apart in due diligence. If it's too dependent on the owner, it doesn't have systems in place, or isn't positioned correctly. Because selling's not just about the numbers, it's about their psychology and strategic preparation. So the corollary really is, and this is I find very interesting as well, is you can have businesses don't perform terribly well on a number of variables, but can also sell well. And I've had a number of clients that have businesses that have warts. They have significant issues, maybe too much owner dependency, maybe overly reliant on a particular supplier, but they're able to sell because they have one or more variables that are off the charts good. They're things that buyers really want, whether it's a particular industry vertical or that the owner is not doing everything in the business, whatever the case may be. So I think what I want to lead people with is running and operating a business. Being successful at that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a great exit.
And when you're talking about the kind of clients that you're helping sell businesses, like what size businesses do you work with typically?
Typically anywhere from revenue levels, anywhere from 500,000 to 15 million. And as I
Okay,
think I
so it's a
mentioned
pretty
earlier,
wide range.
it is. And I mean, look, once you start going below $500,000, the pool of buyers is usually not there in the same way. And sometimes your best bet is to, list it on a listing service or whatnot. Above that level, I can certainly help someone. The principles are exactly the same, but as businesses get larger, they tend to have people on their team who do the kinds of things that I help people with, whether it's a CFO, other advisors. But yes, between 500,000 and 15 million of revenues, and would even take that a bit further. Typically, taking anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 or more a year from their business.
Okay. So at the very low end, you are dealing with some owner operators, but I'd imagine at the $15 million end, it's not so much an owner operator situation.
You know what? Surprisingly, it often is. I
Oh,
have a few
okay.
clients right now that are at that level and they're making, really significant money, but they are still involved. Still don't have, they at that level they'll likely have a management team, two, three, four people, but they're still involved in the business. But it is definitely there is a substantial difference in businesses that are, doing $15 million in revenues versus say 500,000.
Yeah, where somebody's basically buying a really good job for themselves, maybe at the 500,000 level.
Absolutely. And you're more likely to see that, although I meet $500,000 business owners who I mean, at that level, you don't likely have a team, but you may have one
Right.
person effectively doing, basically leading the business, and you as the owner are more passive, and that's a good thing. So you do see a range, even at that level. Some of my 500,000 plus sellers running amazing businesses, like very, very impressive. There are a lot of business owners who, for a variety of reasons, don't want to have a business that's larger or
Mm-hmm.
comfortable, whether they're comfortable with the income that they have or they're comfortable with what the business is for them. I mean, one of my mentors who I really look up to, he asked me once, Dan, what's the point of business? The point of business is to give you the life you want. And I love that answer because, for some people who are making, $500,000 in revenues and maybe making a couple $100,000 a year, it's giving them exactly the life they want.
So, when you're talking about building a saleable, high value business, you're saying to start immediately, even if your sale is years away. So, what are some of the very first steps somebody can do to prepare for that?
Are you asking like well down the road, or you're a year away? Like what time frame? Because what you want
Let's
to do will
Yeah,
change.
let's start if it's like way down the road. Like, say you're operating your business, you're very happy, it's giving you the life you want, but you're thinking, oh, well, maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, I'm eventually going to want to sell. I don't want to scramble and have to get everything ready at the last second. So, kind of when you have that longer time horizon, what kind of things should people start doing now?
Good question. And actually, as I'm thinking about it, the principles tend to be the same. And so I think one of the things that I'll say is that every business is a little bit different. They all have kind of
Mm-hmm.
like their own fingerprint. And so what I find when I do a deep dive with business owners is that most of them have anywhere from 2 to 5 things that really require some work. If I was to choose 3 things, I think number one would be reducing your involvement as an owner, day-to-day operation, beginning to think intensively what that looks like. What shouldn't you be doing? What should you be doing? Who on your team can pick up what it is that you're doing, putting processes and systems in place to reduce your owner involvement. Because look, the reality is it's, it's a whole lot easier to sell a business. The owner is working 5 hours a week than where an owner is working 60 hours a week. And the reality is sometimes it takes a while to do. It's not, in most cases, it's not something you're going to fix in a week's time. So you really want it to begin. And I have a client right now that I think about, and I don't typically see this. He's quite a bit younger. Um, he's in his mid 30s, and he gets it almost from day one. He didn't need to be instructed on this. He knew the value of reducing his involvement on a day-to-day basis. But I don't find that to be the case with most business owners. They really need to make it a concrete priority to do that. So that's really number one. Number two is looking at the diversification of your revenue sources. So really beginning to think, and this is an example of a business that could be doing very, very well from an owner's perspective, making a lot of money, works really well, but 60% of their revenues are coming from one client. That's not a business that's typically easily saleable. So what I tell people is you want to have a diversification of your, revenue and lead generation channels. You want to make sure that at least, and I call it a diversified sales model, you want to have at least 2 to 3 ways you're bringing in business and clients. And to be kind of relentless, the earlier you start with that, the better off you're going to be. And doing the best you can in that process to minimize client concentration. And I think maybe as a third thing is developing the discipline to, if you're further away, keeping your financials clean, reviewing your financials every single month and keeping them clean, continuing that process. That if you're a lot closer to a sale, it's going to be a priority, is really beginning to make sure that your financials are totally in order and that you're very clear on what expenses are in place that are your own, that a buyer would not incur, whether it's cell phone, whether it's automobile expenses, being able to itemize them one by one so that when you have discussions with a buyer, you're able to very clearly articulate what expenses are yours.
So now let's go forward in time and say, okay, several years have gone by and we're 1 year out and we're like, okay, this is it. We're 1 year away from selling. I'm sure all of those other things are priorities, but are there certain extra things when you're getting down to 12 months or less out from a sale that you really need to intensely focus on?
I mean, look, one of them I just mentioned, which is identifying the add backs,
Mm-hmm.
continuing to focus on day-to-day operations. I think, beyond that, it's hard to articulate specific things because every business is a little bit different. And so, I mean, what I do with owners is I take them through a questionnaire and an assessment, and we identify where their biggest weaknesses and biggest challenges are. Everyone's a little bit different. So someone may have a supplier that they have too much dependence on. We're going to work on fixing that. And these things are all, by the way, things that you probably want to even think about 2, 5, 10 years down the road. But the urgency is much greater when you are a year away. You want to look at, you have very clear SOPs, procedures, whether written. A lot of people are doing SOPs via video, making sure that your procedures and processes are very clearly laid out. I mean, I think one of the things is thinking back to my own sale, and I feel very strongly about this. One of the things that I believe gave our buyer the most confidence is that I could essentially show them, here's our manual. Here's basically our business in a box. And if you want to run this business, this is what you need to follow, and this is what you need to do. It gives buyers a ton of confidence. So really getting that process of documenting all of your systems and processes. And then outside of that, I just recommend sitting down with an advisor like myself or someone similar and doing a full scale analysis of your business and saying, where are the weaknesses? Where are the issues? Because what I tell people is there's nothing worse than putting your business up for sale, listing it, going through the process, getting a letter of intent. So it looks like you're close, and then you start due diligence, and a buyer uncovers one, two, three things, either kill the deal, dramatically reduce your price you could have fixed beforehand. So I really recommend, outside of some of the things that I mentioned, getting a one-off analysis on your business to identify the specific risks in your own business.
And that seems like that could just even be good practice, even when you're not trying to sell, kind of like getting a report card or checking in with a coach to be like, hey, this, honest look from somebody that doesn't have a vested interest.
100%. And what's great about doing that is, I mean, two things. One, when you do it early, you've got time to fix things. You can put it on your agenda along with everything else that you're doing in your business because it's busy and you don't want to have to scramble. And so the earlier you know those things, the more time you have to fix them. I mean, I think that's the main thing. And then the other thing I like to say to people, and this goes for almost every business owner that I've ever met, is when you go through an assessment like this is what I learned coming out of working with sellers in my former life as an attorney, is to look at business through two lenses. To look at all of your major decisions from the lens of someone who's interested in growing revenues, growing profit, building up brand equity, etc., but also through the lens of a buyer. So every major decision that you make, look at them through both lenses. And I think that's one of the things that I like to do with people that I meet who aren't ready to sell is explaining to them, here's how a buyer is going to look at your business. And so every one of your decisions, you're thinking about looking at those decisions through the two lenses.
Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of mental exercise too, because it's not only is your business selling whatever product or service it sells, but in addition, the business itself is now becoming a marketable product.
100%. Couldn't have said that better. That's exactly right. And it's being able to walk and chew gum at the same time. It's being able to do two things at once. And look, business owners are used to juggling 30 things at once. So that's not something that's impossible for them to do.
And then when you're talking to buyers and they're looking at businesses, like what is a consistent thing that they're most looking at? Like, is it the profits, the operations, the narratives? What are buyers most interested in, or does it just really depend?
Well, if you're going to ask me what buyers care the most about, they care about predictability. That's what they want.
Okay.
They want predictability. And yes, you're right. It does depend, but there are some variables that are consistently important. So they want to know the business is going to continue to perform after the owner leaves. And that means they care about things like stable cash flow, having a great team in place, having recurring, repeatable revenue. They care about systems, SOPs that, number one, allow the business to be efficient, but also that will support growth and scalability. So really, if it comes down to things, it's having a predictable business that's going to perform in the buyer's hands.
And then, so kind of switching gears a little bit, as people are looking to sell their business, they might look at doing an asset sale or a stock sale. So I guess if we could just kind of globally start with the difference between the two and then what the advantages are of each one.
Well, that's a good question. And in a stock deal, buyers purchasing the shares of the company, the shares of your company if you're a seller, and they assume all of the assets and liabilities of the business, everything. Whereas in an asset deal, buyers get to pick and choose. You pick and choose the specific assets they want to take and also the specific liabilities. And so as a buyer, you're going to tend to prefer those asset deals because you don't want to carry all the legal risks and tax exposures and all the liabilities that a business might be subject to. And so buyers, as a general rule, particularly when you're talking about smaller deals, they're typically going to be asset deals. Interestingly, from a tax perspective too, sellers often typically prefer stock deals because it ends up more tax effective for them, can end up more tax effective, and buyers typically prefer asset deals once again because it's more tax efficient. But you can get around that depending on the structure of the deal. But the key component is the assumption of assets and liabilities. And as I said, most of the deals, certainly most of the deals that I'm involved in, end up being asset deals. As deal size gets up there, then it's more often the possibility that the deal will be either a stock deal or a combination of stock and asset. But I think for most smaller business owners, you want to go into it prepared that it's in all likelihood going to be an asset deal.
And then you talk about having a compelling business narrative. So could you expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
A compelling business narrative means there's two components to that. There's the narrative that is the story, what your business stands for and what your business is about. So one of the areas that I do a lot of work in is with agencies, marketing agencies, et cetera. And so if you're a marketing agency and you service every kind of client and you provide 12 different services, it's hard to have a narrative. Is if you service small financial firms, your specialty is SEO. All of a sudden, you've got an interesting narrative, an interesting story about your business. And so there's that side of it. And so what I encourage owners to do, and look at in the early stages of your business, narrative is less important than being able to stay afloat and earn enough money to keep the doors open. But as you develop, grow, become more sophisticated and more stable, it's important for you to be very clear on who it is your client is and what it is that you offer those clients, and begin to think about the story of your business. And that can extend beyond what the business does to how you provide services, how you manage your team, et cetera. But just having a simple way to describe your business and what it is that you do, I think is very important. And it's one of the things that I do when I'm looking at businesses to help. I look at their website and I see, is there a story there? Is there something that's interesting there? Buyers are looking for something interesting. And so for me, if I can help someone, I start with, is there a story? Or is there something interesting there about their business that would be appealing? The second component of narrative is what I call a growth plan. So what's the story? And I don't mean story as in fabrication, but what is the story you can share with a buyer about what they can do with your business once it's in their hands? Get them excited about, it's what I call a buyer's growth plan, is to get them excited about what the business can do is in their hands. And that's one of the things that I learned. I sold to private equity, and one of the things that impressed me a lot, and I learned from them, is that when they sell businesses, they have a full runway for buyers, things that they can do to take their business to the next level. And so I try to encourage my sellers to have exactly that same type of approach. Something in there, a story, a narrative that will get them impressed or have them impressed about what the business can do in their hands.
Yeah, so they kind of get inspired and they start dreaming, and the business looks like it's predictably going to continue making revenue, but the buyer has to feel like maybe they're seeing something that the seller doesn't, that they're going to be able to take up to the next level and really scale it.
Exactly. And having a growth plan, there's no better way to get a higher multiple for your business than having a compelling growth plan. Like no better way. And so having the predictability, as you mentioned, knowing that the business is stable and that it can continue to generate revenues and profits, but that there is a pathway for going to the next level. And, depending on who that potential buyer is, whether it's because they're all going to want to know, why are you exiting, and what are some of the issues, and depending on what the business is, you may say, look, I don't want to scale with more people. HR expertise is not my thing. Hiring is not my thing. And if you've got a buyer who's very good with that, they get excited. They say, hey, you know what? That's what we're good at. As well, you can say, look, I don't have the money to scale the business. I'd love to, and I've got a compelling plan. And many buyers will say, money is what we have. And so we can take your plan, go to the next level with it.
So it sounds like it's also important for the seller to have a good reason to sell that's going to be well digested by the buyer.
That's correct. And you know what, when you talk about narrative, there's another narrative, which is, why are you exiting the business? And look, no buyer wants to hear, I'm leaving because it's, I'm struggling, or it's causing me tons of problems, or I'm, you know, burnt out, or I'm tired of it. You want to come in positive. Look, you don't want to lie, but you want to be positive. And
And
yeah,
yeah,
sorry, go
I
ahead.
was going to say more than one thing can be true at a time. So it could be true that you are burned out, and running a small business is incredibly, it's like being in a marriage, it's incredibly time consuming. But it could also be true that, like you said, maybe you don't have the capital to scale it to the next level or whatever. And so just finding something else that's not a lie, but it's not, oh, I can't do this anymore.
That's right. That's right. And look, I can think of an owner a number of years ago who had an amazing business. And he knew he was burnt out. He knew that there was an incredible, compelling proposition to grow it. And I think he was a little depressed that he didn't want to or couldn't put the required money in to the business to have it realize its potential. And so afterwards, seeing and being continuing to be somewhat involved in the business after, it was exciting for him. He got fully re-energized in his business because the buyer put in a chunk of money and allowed the business to go to the next level. So you're right. It can be both things at once.
And do you ever find, so you start working with a business and you're helping them get prepared, you're giving them good systems, you're maybe figuring out ways for the owner to not have to be so integrally involved, that somebody changes their mind and they're like, oh, you know what? Now I'm kind of in love with my business again. You've come in, you've helped me make it more profitable. I don't have to be here 7 days a week now because we have these new systems in place, and I don't want to sell it anymore.
It does happen. And you know what? That excites me just as much as someone wanting to sell it. Because look, as I said earlier, the goal of business is to give you the life you want. And if it's serving you to keep it, keep it. Absolutely. And look, all the things that I talk about make the business more valuable to a buyer also make it more valuable for you to keep it. And so there's no reason that you shouldn't do those things at all. Because then once you do that, you have options. And especially too, like Like, look, if you solve a lot of the problems and pull yourself out of the business, decide you want to keep it because it's working really well for you, and then you end up, running it, working a few hours every week for a whole bunch of years. When you do decide to sell it, you're gonna have a full track record of that business operating without your involvement, and it will just make it simply more valuable.
What are some of the red flags? So, like, if a seller starts looking at a business, what are some of the worst red flags where they're like, this is going to kill the deal?
The biggest red flag, and I've mentioned, is the owner doing too much, being the face of the business. That is the number one red flag. Many of the questions that you get from buyers are all them trying to determine how involved you are in the business. Because it's very easy for an owner to say, hey, you know what, I'm not involved. But they're going to dig and they're going to dig and they're going to dig. And so that's the I would say that's probably one of the number one things, number one red flag to watch out for, is the owner doing too much in the business. Other red flags are inconsistent financials. Or, bookkeeping is not done properly. One of the things that when I work with people right at the very beginning, I ask them, do you do your own bookkeeping? And sadly, many business owners do, and that's a problem. And sometimes it may be, what, my spouse is doing my bookkeeping. To me, is sometimes a problem too. It depends on their background and experience, etc. You want ideally a third party doing your books. I'm not suggesting that you spend, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a month. You can spend $100 or $200 a month having a third party do your books. I think that's really important. Other red flags, legal issues. Do you have outstanding claims, outstanding litigation? Do you have unpaid taxes? Documentation is important. So if you've got no documentation in your business, if you have no employment contracts, no contractor agreements, no client contracts, no supplier agreements, that's a red flag for people. In the context of an actual transaction, and I think this is something that people don't necessarily appreciate, is during the due diligence process, when buyers are trying to learn everything they can about you, when you push back or you respond slowly, that's a big red flag for a buyer. They don't want pushback. They want everything to come quickly, easily, thoroughly. And that's one of the things that I do with owners, is make sure they're fully prepared diligence process. Because look, not only does it demonstrate to buyers that you're organized, well structured, but also ensures that the deal can happen faster. Because look, if you're slow, process time kills deals. The longer you take, more things can change, whether it's the market changes, the buyer has financial issues, etc. You want to be able to provide everything quickly, and you want to be honest. You want to be transparent. So, a major red flag, if a buyer suspects you're withholding or keeping information from them, they're going to walk. And so what that means, once again, from a preparation perspective, is every business owner has things that they don't want to share, or that may be, red flags. You need to practice. You need to think about what your answer will be. You need to be, you need to work that out beforehand, so that when you get asked those questions, you've got a clear, simple, concise answer.
And how long it probably depends on the size of the business, but how long does the sale process typically take? Like, not once you list, but once you say you have a prospective buyer, from like the first day that a buyer is like, hey, I might be interested, until you close escrow, what does that timeline typically look like?
I mean, let's just say from a letter of intent. So you've
Okay.
actually got a formal offer from a buyer. That can take anywhere from 1 month, 6 months would be
Okay.
typical. And you're right, it does depend on the size of the business and the complexity of the business. So, a $500,000 business with, one key person, with a normal number of clients, it's not going to take that long. You can probably from LOI signing to close do it in, anywhere from 1 to 3 months. As the deal size gets larger, the complexity of the structure and the business is there, it can take you upwards of 6 months or longer. Yeah, I'm just going to add this as well. So, because I get asked this question all the time, how long, from the time I decide to list to the time it closes, what should I expect? And I tell people anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. And depending on the business, sometimes it could take you a couple of years to sell. If your business is very specific, I wouldn't say that with, in the agency world, because look, there's a lot of agencies out there, which means there's a lot of buyers. But if your business is very, very specific or very focused, yes, it may take you longer to sell.
What are some typical mistakes that you see that, like, it's a first time seller of a small business, kind of their mistake that will really trip them up?
Number of things. I think the number one mistake, I see this all the time, is business owners overvalue their business. So they value their business based on motion, not market reality. So they use just a number they picked out of the air. In other words, they know someone that, my friend sold his agency for 5 million, so my business should be worth 5 million. Or, I read somewhere that businesses of my size sell for this, and so I should get that. Those are the sorts of things that happen all the time. And that's why I encourage people. It's one of the things that I do with a business owner that knows they want to sell, relatively soon. I give them a sense of what businesses will sell for in their market. I want an owner to be very clear market reality. So if the numbers aren't there, wonderful. Time not to sell. Let's work on the business and get your number to where it needs to be. Or you go back and think about, okay, do I really need that amount? So that's sort of the number one area that people get tripped up on, is overvaluing their business, often based on emotion. Another thing that really messes people up is most sellers don't appreciate the deal isn't done until it's done. So, and it's very easy. And I saw this myself. It's a challenge. Once you have that LOI, to almost start spending the money, to almost feel like the money it's a done deal. And that can dramatically impact your negotiating, your leverage, your flexibility, etc. And so I tell everyone that I work with, a deal hasn't happened until it's over. It's all contingent. And in fact, you want to protect yourself, assume it's not going to happen. And so that just makes you approach the negotiation process a lot more practically. Um, Another area that I think people really get tripped up on is they focus only on price. They ignore terms. So, you can have a $10 million deal. Someone offers you $10 million for your business, but it's $1 million cash, $9 million earnout. And the earnout could be based on things that you can't control, like the profitability of the business after you sell. And so, focused on the fact that they've got a $10 million offer, you forget the fact that most of it's contingent. So you really have to focus on the entirety of the deal and ask yourself, am I comfortable with the entirety of the deal? Not just the price, not just the price. And what else? I think that one other thing I think people get tripped up on, this is really, really important, is that you need to keep your business performing during the sale process. And that's, once again, one of the reasons why I think it's super important for people to prepare before they sell, is that you have the time and energy, manage the sale, and also manage your business. Because it goes without saying that if your business, the numbers drop during the diligence process, your offer is going to drop. And you don't want that to happen. You really need to be focused on both the deal as well as your business.
So is it maybe a good idea to bring in a little extra help or support during that time to assist you with running it, or sales or something, to be sure that it's really continuing to rev up?
And it's not a bad idea, but it's not my preference. My
Okay.
preference is, if you prepare in advance, you won't need the extra help. You will not. because you're going to have all your documentation in order. You've focused on the things that are problematic, worked on fixing them. You've put together the right team. You've done everything that you need to do. There's no reason, if you prepared adequately, why you can't do both at the same time.
So now going to like somebody has sold their business, if you were to query and kind of talk to some of the sellers, what's something that they regret after selling that they really wish they would have known beforehand?
Very, very good question and a very important question. So the number one thing is not having an adequate plan for what life looks like for you after the sale. So it's what I call your what's next. And one of the things that I do, especially, with clients that are a few years away, is encourage them to find that now, start doing that now. Something that I did in my own business. Doing what I'm doing now is something that I started doing more of. Look, I know myself and knew I would not be happy doing nothing after I sold. And I think most business owners are that way. What I tell people is you cannot go 100 miles an hour to zero. Just, it doesn't work. You will pay the price, all likelihood. And so you need to have a plan and you need to operationalize that plan beforehand. So whatever that is, if you tell yourself, I'm going to play more golf, start playing more golf right away and see if that's the right thing for you. If you want to do charitable work, start doing that now and see if that excites you. If you want to travel, start doing a little bit of that travel now. If you plan on starting another business, start that business now. You don't have to you don't have to be full time on it. Begin that process so that you can transition very, very easily. Because look, I've told myself this from the beginning. I don't want to work with someone that regrets sale. And the biggest regrets come from not knowing what to do with yourself after you sell. So that's sort of the number one thing. Number two thing that I see is business owners aren't prepared emotionally for the identity shift that comes from selling their business. And what I mean by that is a lot of owners, if you've been running your business for 10 years, 15, 20 years, the business is you. It's your baby. You identified yourself as a business owner rather than I run a business. And that identification can be very hard because you'll lose that after you sell. It's not your business anymore. And so you need to, and this is another thing that I work with people on, and you can tell pretty quickly who the people are who are really tightly wound and wrapped in their business. And then we've got to work on that. We've got to work on who they are inside the business so that there are no regrets after. And then I think the third and sort of final thing is this comes back to, I think, what we talked about a couple minutes ago is settling for a deal structure you didn't fully understand. So one of the things when we talked about earnouts, the different types of structures that you can have. You can cash at closing, you have a note, you have an earnout, you can have rollover compensation, you have a whole variety of things. And what I tell people is this is the conservative attorney in me. Ask yourself, would I do the deal? The only compensation I walk away with is cash on closing. If the answer to that is yes, then feel free to have lots of contingent compensation. But what happens sometimes is people get a certain amount of cash on closing, but they're depending on getting the full earnout, or depending on the note being paid out, or if they take stock in the new business after you sell, they're depending on a second bite of the apple. If it doesn't happen, how are you going to feel? So you need to be really, really clear in your own mind. This is what your advisors are there for, whether it's your financial advisors, your accountants, etc. Really clear on how you mentally handle different possibilities.
In those kind of deals, do you structure in like a clawback clause so if the company's starting to falter that they would go back in and help turn it back around?
Clawbacks are not that typical. Buyers will ask for holdbacks. When you sell, they will ask for a certain amount of money to be held back. to make sure that every representation and warranty that you made about your business is actually true. So it's not unusual for anywhere from 5 to 20% of the money to be held back for anywhere from 6 months to a couple of years, just to ensure that the business is what you anticipated. Um, you know, Clawback is possible. Renegotiations could be possible, but it's not typical. If the business is struggling, then it depends on why it's struggling. Struggling because the buyer's not doing what they're supposed to do, that's one thing. Struggling because the seller represented things that were simply not true, it's another thing. A lot of it really depends on the structure of the deal and how involved a buyer will be or a seller will be in the business after it's sold.
And usually, I'm sure sellers are somewhat involved afterward to help advise the new buyer. How does that typically look? Like, is it they're typically advising for 6 months, for a year? Are they there part time? Do you ever have cases where they get hired back by the buyer to operate the company for a period of time?
Every one of those is a possibility, and it is a full negotiation depending on what you as a seller want and what the buyers want, and depends on your business too. If your business has incredibly high customer concentration, there's a pretty good chance that you may still be sticking around for a period of time to ensure the transition over to the buyer. And a lot of it's negotiation. So I have seen anywhere from cash on closing, seller walking away, all the way to I had one of the first clients that I worked with stayed with the buyer for 10 years, continued to run the
Wow.
business, and that's what they both wanted, and that worked really well for them. And you can have everything in between. In terms of what's typical is a seller being there anywhere from 3 months to a year. A lot of it depends too on the type of buyer. So strategic buyers, meaning someone that's, might be in your industry, are often less concerned about how long you're there. So in all likelihood, you may be out sooner rather than later, and once again, if you want to be involved, very few buyers are going to, turn you down if you want to continue to be involved, because it just ensures that there's a continuity, predictability, as we talked about earlier. Um, but private equity buyers tend to be a little bit different. They tend not, and I'm generalizing because it's not the case in every situation, but generally they like to have um, sellers stay on or key people stay on, and so it's not unusual in a PE, a PE situation for sellers to continue staying on for quite a period of time.
So they kind of sell the business, they get a chunk of money that maybe is for their retirement or something, and then they're able to continue on with the business, but now as an employee instead of all the stress of being the owner.
That's correct. And it all, once again, all depends on how you structure. But yes, that is definitely the possibility of. I mean, look, I'm just going to use my own business as an example. That's what happened with me, and I stayed on for a period of time, and it's very different when it's not your business. It really is different, and there are many things about it that are amazing. Things that you really sort of dislike doing, but you had to do as a business owner. All of a sudden, you weren't responsible for them, and it was nice. So there is definitely, and I've got several clients that I can think of right off the bat who sold and are loving and stayed on and are loving what they're doing, because they get to do exactly what they do best and offload all the things that they don't like. So that is 100% the possibility. And a lot of it just depends on what you want. Do I want to continue working for my own happiness, and do I want to see the business go to the next level, or do I want to be done? So a lot of it, it's, as I said, it's a negotiation, and it's being clear about about the deal that you want. So I mean, I tell people you want to be incredibly flexible about your deal structure and your involvement. The more flexible you are, the more potential buyers you're going to attract. At the same time, you want to be realistic, especially if you're using an advisor, a broker, or a banker. If you want to be out in 3 months, tell them you want to be out in 3 months, and they will tell you whether it's going to be feasible given the nature of your business and given the nature of the types of buyers that would be interested in your business.
I Thank you so much. I appreciate all of your answers and taking all this time. And so I was just going to ask you a little bit specifically about your own business.
I think over the last several years, I've probably helped owners in 25 plus states. So certainly across the U.S. I have had clients in Canada, and I have several clients that are overseas as well. So the interesting thing about selling a business and the principles for increasing values, it doesn't matter where you are. The principles are exactly the same whether you're in the UK, whether you're in the US, whether you're in France, South America, the principles are exactly the same.
I saw that one of the resources you have is you have a school community, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that. And for people who don't know, what is a school community?
Sure, and I have a couple of great resources for people. So one is the school community, and it's free. It's School is a platform that I love because it has a communication platform, so I can post and people can post questions. It has a classroom component, so I have materials in there. So I have a course that people can sign up for. It's all free. To number one, do an assessment of their business and determine, number one, what the value of it is, what some of the risk factors are, and also how to work on fixing some of the risk factors that they have in their business. I have a number of other tools that and guides and resources in the community. Once again, all free. And also just recently set up what I call the Business Exit Blueprint AI. The school community is called the Business Exit Blueprint, and that's what I call my full service advisory offering, the Business Exit Blueprint. And so recently I created the Business Exit Blueprint AI. And so what I've done is I've trained AI on 1,000 plus exits and exit conversations that I've been involved in over the last 15 plus years, including all of my frameworks and materials. So and it's also free. So if you sign up, and it's private, so you can instantly guide you where you're leaving money on the table. And you just literally just tell it about your business situation, your revenues, trying to exit, what your biggest concerns are, and show you exactly what buyers will care about and how to maximize value. And that's available 24/7. So you keep it available. You got anything that's an exit related question, it's there for you anytime.
That sounds like an incredible tool. Why did you choose to make it free rather than monetize it?
I have a mission. I think I mentioned this at the beginning. It's a passion of mine to make sure that people don't get taken advantage of when they sell their business. So I did very, very well on my exit. I don't do this to support myself. I do this because I love to do it. And so the more people I can help sell their business effectively, the happier I am. So that's why it's free. And, look, I've got a business owner that's a year away, 2 years away, 3 years away. I'm happy to chat with anyone, no charge. One conversation, two conversations, answer all the questions they have. If they want to, as I said, go through the assessment tool. It's one of the best tools that I've ever seen. I actually took the assessment before I sold my own business, and I think the thing that blew me away was every one of the drivers in that tool were relevant in my own sale. So I strongly encourage, no matter how far away you are from selling your business, I encourage people to take that right away, and you'll be armed. And I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations with people that never became clients. I'm happy because I know they can walk away knowing a lot more about how businesses are valued and how they can fix their own business.